West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Adam Josephson, as we are careening once again through debt ceiling drama, which always in the past, for me, always contained the lack of suspense about what the final outcome was, because of course the Congress was going to move the debt ceiling or suspend the debt ceiling or deal with it in a way that would avoid default. But when you have one party in the Senate that, as far as I can tell, accepts the label crazy and seems to think that's the way to profit politically with Trump voters, is to appear to be crazy and reckless and dangerous like Donald Trump, it's just a little trickier trying to figure out what happens next.
Yeah, it sure is. And, you know, I was there in the Senate in 2011, 10 years ago, when we had our last major debt ceiling crisis, where we came within a few days of defaulting and we reached a deal at the last minute. But, you know, what's different about now versus then was that we were engaged in, you know, active, open negotiations in 2011, you know, in the weeks leading up to the default. Right now, there is nothing going on. Mitch McConnell is not making any demands as he was back then. He just is basically, you know, so playing this game of chicken and staring down the prospect of default. And frankly, what he's doing is he is daring Democrats to reform the filibuster, as you laid out in your opening. And I think that, you know, he's not necessarily operating from a position of strength here. In large part, I think his stance is determined by the fact that he doesn't control his conference in the way that he would want to, and can't prevent his fellow Republicans from obstructing Democrats if they were to choose to use the reconciliation path. So really, Democrats know that they're closing in on a very narrow range of options, and probably the best option available to them is to pass some kind of narrow filibuster reform, because the other options simply might not get them to where they need to get to in order to raise the debt ceiling by the time the extraordinary measures run out. So I think, you know, we think a lot about McConnell, but he may not actually be operating from a position of strength here. And I think that's one thing that's very important for Democrats to factor into their thinking.
Michelle, one of the reasons why I've never really previously worried about the debt ceiling is that people like Mitch McConnell, Mitch McConnell's very, very rich, and he got rich in a very old-fashioned way. He married the money. He has somewhere around the order of $30 million, maybe more. Mitt Romney, very, very, very rich man. These are the kinds of people who are hurt very, very badly by the kind of market crash you would have if we were to crash into the debt ceiling. And so my confidence in Republican senators especially own personal interest in their own personal wealth has always guided me through the panic stages of debt ceiling brinksmanship with that expectation. But this time, it does include this other element, which Mitch McConnell is teaching the Democrats, the Joe Manchin, the Angus King, people who've been holding back on that notion of adjusting the 60 vote threshold. He's teaching them the best lesson yet this year that's actually happening on the Senate floor at the moment about why that 60 vote threshold needs to go.
I mean, everything that's terrifying, everything that is dysfunctional in our politics can in some ways be attributed at this point to the filibuster, right? It's the debt ceiling. Although Joe Biden is still working to put together 50 votes for this reconciliation package, the only reason that he has to legislate in this ridiculous way, that he has to kind of cram his entire legislative agenda to be put in one bill that can only be passed through this procedural trick, is because the Republicans refuse to allow sort of regular order. And so you could imagine if they sort of broke this up and passed each piece individually, some Republicans would have some incentive to at least negotiate on things like paid leave. Instead, the only way to do anything is through this kind of absurd procedural trickery. Likewise with Voting Rights Act. Likewise with voting rights. There's a proposal that Manchin himself has put together that cannot pass under the current configuration. And the current configuration is meant to even further entrench minority rule, which will make it harder and harder for Democrats to win elections, let alone govern, even if they get substantial electoral majorities.
And Professor Cobb, if you were to open up the 60 vote threshold for, let's say, debt ceiling votes, well, now you've done it. Now these senators, many of them for the first times in their lives, have participated in a rule change. And maybe it won't be quite so hard when you apply that same focus to, say, preserving democracy.
I mean, that's the hope, but one of the things that's always been right from the outset, of this discussion has been, the defense of the filibuster around the idea that a 60 vote threshold will force a majority party and a minority party to do the kind of horse trading that's supposed to be integral to the actual legislative process. But the opposite of that has been happening. And when the people who are holding out and defending the filibuster can't get that process to happen on their own, then it means that this system is fatally flawed. When Kirsten Sinema, in the op-ed she wrote back in June, said this was like her reasoning for defending the filibuster, what also has happened is that now people don't have to be on the record for anything. They're absolved from having to take a vote. And so there's really no incentive for them to change this system in which they're benefiting and at the same time obstructing the opposition party's president's agenda. And so that really has to happen.
It is Wednesday, the 6th of October of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Yes, a lovely velvety hollandaise sauce on a perfectly cooked couple of eggs. Yummy. Or will no one rid us of these meddlesome priests, and especially the abusive ones? Did you read that story about what's happening in France? Yeah, apparently the Catholic Church hid how many? Some thousands and thousands of pedophile priests? A few bishops, too. Maybe a cardinal or four. So, and that's just the Catholic Church. Think about what's running around in the general population. I'm just saying. Yep. There's all sorts of jokes about that, but we're not going to get into it right now because, we'll get rid of the meddlesome priests and all their fellow travelers as well. Let's be clear, the Catholic Church has no monopoly, shall we say, on these practices. Just saying. Yeah, also, I guess apparently there's something about Republicans beating up their women. That's how they refer to them, my woman. Yeah, beating up their girlfriends and their wives, and then suing them, the girlfriends and the ex-wives, to not talk about the restraining order a judge was granted them. I would say, you know what? You're running for office, it's going to come out. And you can't stop it. Streisand effect. Every time they do it, it'll get worse. I'm just saying. So, what else is going on in the world? Oh, too much. Apparently, there's a couple of judges who disagree on the severity of the sentencing of the insurrectionists on January 6th. All I can say is that one of the judges in question is a Federalist Society judge. Let's be clear. We're not talking about two Federalist Society judges arguing about this. We're not talking about two just regular constitutional scholars arguing about this. All right? Russia did this. Putin did this, except it didn't take Putin as long. Let's be clear. The old Soviet fighters adopted, here in the United States, adopted the 70-year Soviet plan. And it's taken them about 50 years or so to finally get what they're getting, and here we are. And everybody thought it was going to be about communism. No. It's about fascism. They called Eisenhower a commie. Jeez, I wish we were as at least socialist as Eisenhower. God. Yeah, he built the interstate highway system and they called him a commie. You mean people are going to be using this? Hey, look. When it's taxpayer money, it's not communism. Yeah, and there's no such thing as a free lunch either. Give me a break. You know, when I went to Catholic school, there was lunch brought to me every lunchtime. Hot lunch. I didn't have to dig into my wallet to pay for it. You know why? Because when you pay for the tuition, you got the lunch. When you pay your property taxes, and the property taxes are used to support the schools, you paid for the lunch. It's not free. Give me a break. Only, I don't know. These former Soviet fighters who are now coming out here saying, oh, the means of production. What? The gulags ain't far behind because they're right here in private hands. That's how fascism works. Oh, yeah, we're not socialists. We got private enterprise running our gulags. Good. Well, in that case, we have a lot of gated communities to quarantine these people, don't we? About 73 million. Look, they got the shopping malls in there. They got the little weird water parks. Even the Botox centers. You know, they'll fill their faces up with Botox, but don't give me the vaccine. I want medical freedom. Well, yeah, right. Medical freedom to what? Infect the rest of us? No. And anybody who's upset because a group of people wants to make sure everyone is healthy, and their only argument is that I have a religious fundamental freedom to whatever I want to do. I don't want to be part of the group. Well, you know what? Then we'll quarantine you. We already have the gated communities where you'll feel safe. And so will we. They already have the infrastructure for survival. Might have to build a few more guard shacks, but they already have the guard shacks. What's so hard about this? I'm not talking about re-education camps. And I made this joke before. You have to educate them first before you can re-educate them. No, I'm not talking about retribution against sins committed. I'm talking about keeping them away from the rest of us so that we don't catch whatever it is they got. And that is why I am not Poet Philosopher King running the show. I'm Poet Philosopher King. I'm just not running the show. That's why we have a representative democracy, so that we can argue about this, about, well, sure, they tried to grind our face into the mud with their iron boot, goose-stepping all over the Constitution, and mom and apple pie, too. But we have to be civil, don't we? No, we don't. Punch the Nazis. Jesus. How hard is it to understand? We're Americans. We punch the Nazis. We don't negotiate with them. You negotiate with a Nazi, the Nazi's going to kill you. How many times do we have to be told? Jeez. Ofen. Was he a corporal? Typed really good, though. Carried that typewriter all over the D-Day theater. Mm-hmm. Well, we do have a curated show for you, as we always do. We take the time to actually curate a show because we just can't go off on these tangents all the time. Not all the time. So what is part of our curated show? Well, at the top, that was a former Senate staffer breaking it down that about how Mitch McConnell is daring Democrats to reform the filibuster, which is just a nice way of saying that McConnell is playing chicken. Just like in Rebel Without a Cause, except this Grim Reaper has a cause, and that is the abject destruction of a representative democracy as we know it. And he'll be safe because he married rich. Okay, well, we'll see. When you're out of power, Mitch, we'll see how long you stay with Elaine. On the rest of the menu, the Treasury Department told Arizona's governor, passed the doozy on the right-hand side, that his state could not use federal funds to pay for programs aimed at undermining mask requirements in schools. He's going to take federal funds for COVID relief and use it to undermine the COVID abatement. You know, it's an abatement system now, a vector. I don't know. If you take the virus's side, shouldn't that be a crime? I would make it a crime. But then again, I'm only a Poet Philosopher King, but I'm not running the show. I guess that's a good thing. Pennsylvania charged Energy Transfer LP with 48 counts of environmental crimes for its conduct during construction of the long-delayed Mariner East 2 natural gas liquids pipeline. And a group of prominent attorneys filed an ethics complaint against a former top Justice Department official who was under investigation for plotting to help Trump overturn the 2020 presidential election. Yeah, those are wordy, but hey, it says what it says. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the European Union unveiled a new strategy to combat growing anti-Semitism in Europe. I wish they'd do it here. And four-wheeled autonomous mobile robots powered by artificial intelligence are giving Greece's postal service a major speed boost, naturally, with robots. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page, and do please become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. If you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, and if you could afford to send those funds to us once a month, we're able to stretch those dollars beyond compare. We're able to pay our bills, fly under the radar, and continue this decade-long resistance against the Nazi takeover of the United States of America. We've been resisting it even before people were confident enough to call it a Nazi takeover, because that's exactly what it's been. But thank you for your generosity all these many years, and thank you to those who might be able to afford to send us the amount of what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink once a month. We have a lot of experience doing this, and you are helping us fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended, oh so many years ago. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so simply by going to @NetrootsRadio. It's so simple. And thank you, Tom, for taking care of that, and so much more. And you can also follow me on Twitter, and I suggest you do. And you can find me on Twitter @JusticePutnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos about 10 minutes before showtime, and get that posted up on Twitter and a few other social media platforms. You know which one I'm talking about. That one. When it's turned on. When they're not scrubbing whatever criminal data they have. Took them 6 hours. 6 hours to scrub all that criminal data. I wonder where it went. Is it in the cloud? We'll see. Anyway, you can also follow the show on Twitter @CookbookWest, and do please pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. This first offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy comes out of Reuters by Andrea Shalalo. Deputy Treasury Secretary Wally Adeyemo told Arizona's governor yesterday, Tuesday, that his state could not use federal funds to pay for programs aimed at undermining face mask requirements in schools, and said Arizona could lose funding if it did not change course. In a letter to Governor Douglas Ducey, Adeyemo raised concerns about 2 new Arizona state programs funded under the Coronavirus Relief American Rescue Plan, which he said would undermine evidence-based efforts to stop the spread of COVID-19. The disease continues to pose an imminent threat, killing over 1,500 Americans every single day. In recent weeks, he said. Adeyemo's letter comes a month after the U.S. Department of Education opened civil rights investigations to determine whether 5 states, Iowa, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, and Utah, that have banned schools from requiring masks, are discriminating against students with disabilities. One of the Arizona programs offers grants to school districts on condition they do not require the use of face coverings during instructional hours. The second gives families a voucher of up to $7,000 per student to cover tuition or other educational costs at a new school that does not require face coverings if the student's current school requires them. You know what they're trying to do, of course. You can't leave a disaster uncapitalized upon. They're getting rid of public education. This has been one of their other Soviet 70-year plans to get rid of public education. They're not turning us into commies. They're turning us into fascists. They're book burners. Ducey announced the two programs in August after some Arizona school districts defied a ban on school mask mandates passed by the state's Republican legislature this year. Both programs tapped a $350 billion with a B fund established under the American Rescue Plan to mitigate the fiscal effects of the COVID-19 emergency, which has killed over 700,000 people in the United States, the secretary said in his letter. All program or service that imposes conditions on participation or acceptance of the service that would undermine the efforts to stop the spread of COVID-19 or discourage compliance with evidence-based solutions for stopping the spread of COVID-19 is not a permissible use of such funds, he said. The secretary asked Ducey to respond within 30 days on how Arizona planned to come into compliance with the federal requirements, warning that failure to respond or remediate may result in administrative or other action. Such action could include federal efforts to recoup the funds, a Treasury official said. Arizona officials are reviewing the letter and will respond, said Ducey's spokesperson, C.J. Karamorgan. While the Biden administration continues to focus on mandates, here in Arizona we trust families to make decisions about what's best for their children, he said, adding that the voucher program is giving families in need access to resources like tutoring, childcare, and transportation. They're trying to get rid of public education, and they're using the pandemic as an excuse because we are stomping all over their medical freedom and liberty. Florida, Texas, and Arkansas have also banned mandatory mask orders in schools. The Education Department left those states and Arizona out of its inquiry because court orders or other actions have paused their enforcement, it said in a news release. Staff at Reuters brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro charged Energy Transfer LP with 48 counts of environmental crimes for its conduct during construction of the long-delayed Mariner East 2 natural gas liquids pipeline. There is a duty to protect our air and water, and when companies harm these vital resources through negligence, it is a crime, Shapiro said in a statement. Mariner East has been slowed by numerous work stoppages by state and local officials, mostly related to sinkholes that develop near the pipeline or spills of drilling fluids used to bore under waterways. Energy Transfer, which was not immediately available for comment, said recently it planned to complete all phases of the pipeline expansion by the end of 2021. They mean in just a few months. Mariner East transports liquids from the Marcellus Utica Shale in western Pennsylvania to customers in the state and elsewhere, including international exports from Energy Transfer's Marcus Hook complex near Philadelphia. The Attorney General's office said that in addition to repeatedly spilling thousands of gallons of drilling fluid, Energy Transfer on several occasions failed to report the spills to state environmental regulators in spite of the legal requirement to do so. Badges. We don't need no stinking badges. In addition, the Attorney General's office said the drilling fluid contained unapproved additives at multiple locations that affected drinking water in wells. If convicted, this company will be sentenced to fines and restitution. There is no jail time for these environmental crimes, and fines are not enough, Shapiro said, noting his office was calling for stronger laws to hold these companies accountable. Energy Transfer started work on the $2.5 billion Mariner East expansion in February of 2017 and originally planned to finish the 350-mile pipeline in the third quarter of 2017. Since then, Pennsylvania has issued about 125 notices of violations to Mariner East, mostly for drilling fluid spills, including 2 just in September. Sarah N. Lynch of Reuters brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A group of prominent attorneys yesterday, Tuesday, filed an ethics complaint against Jeffrey Bossert Clark, a former top Justice Department official who was under investigation for plotting to help Donald Trump overturn the 2020 presidential election. The complaint, signed by former Justice Department lawyers and spearheaded by the group Lawyers Defending American Democracy, asks the District of Columbia Bar's disciplinary office to investigate Clark's actions and sanction him. Mr. Clark made false statements about the integrity of the election in a concerted effort to disseminate an official statement of the United States Department of Justice that the election results in multiple states were unreliable, they wrote, noting such conduct put American democracy at grave risk. An attorney for Clark could not immediately be reached because that's how they always are. Clark was nominated by the former guy as Assistant Attorney General of the Justice Department's Environment and Natural Resources Division, a former Kirkland & Ellis lawyer, you know, the white shoe law firm there, who defended British Petroleum in the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Tony just wanted his life back, and they got his life back for him, with a raise, as a matter of fact. And he frequently clashed with career attorneys inside the division over his narrow interpretations of the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts. He was later also tapped as acting head of the Civil Division at the end of the Trump administration. In January, the Justice Department's Inspector General announced his office was launching an investigation into whether Clark plotted to oust then acting Attorney General Jeff Rosen so he could take over the department and help Trump pursue his baseless claims by opening an investigation into voter fraud in Georgia. Emails obtained by ABC News show that Clark also drafted a letter he wanted Rosen to approve, which urged Georgia to convene a special legislative session to investigate voter fraud claims. Clark's plan, which was first reported by the New York Times and independently confirmed by Reuters, ultimately failed after senior department leaders pledged to resign in protest. All right, well, this guy should lose more than his law license. Let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Sarah Vitak. If you're kitchen savvy, you probably know the water test method for getting stainless steel pans to the right temperature. All you have to do is splash a few drops of water in a pan as it's being heated, and when the pan reaches the right temperature, instead of evaporating, the drops will form into beads and they skate all over the pan. You have to do this test in an empty pan. And that's because, as the not-so-kitchen-savvy among us may have learned the hard way, mixing oil and water in a hot pan is a recipe for flying, burning hot liquids. The phenomenon that happens when beads of water skate around in your empty pan has been understood for a long time. Here is Dr. Kripa Varanasi from the Mechanical Engineering Department at MIT explaining it.
They're levitating on their vapor layer or the vapor cushion that's forming because the liquid is evaporating. And so they can move around with very little friction. That's called the Leidenfrost state. And then if you're at a lower temperature, you could start boiling the drop. But the drop is sticking to the surface.
But recently, Dr. Varanasi and his graduate student, Victor Leon, set out to look at hot oil and water interactions a bit more closely.
What we found here that's very interesting is when you have a thin oil layer and you have the drop on it, you still can get both those states, but in between there is another state where it can race at very high speeds on the surface.
The experiments were so simple you could run them in your kitchen. They just use a hot plate with either a piece of metal or a silicone wafer on top. Then they added the oil. They used silicone oil. Then a syringe to place a water drop. The one thing they did a little more precisely than you would in the kitchen is that they applied the oil by spin coating. So that's a process that creates a very thin and very uniform surface. Their oil layer was about 10 microns, or about a hair's width thick. Then they used high-speed imaging equipment to capture the result. And what they saw in these videos was that when the droplets were placed on the hot oil, they would propel themselves in random directions at very high speeds. Several things about this were surprising. First, that the droplet propels itself. It was clear pretty quickly how that was happening.
Easy way to think about this is it's called momentum transfer. So if you take a balloon and blow air in it and you release it, the balloon just flies everywhere, right?
Similar to the balloon, what was happening on the hot plate was that the oil was forming a thin layer around the drop. The oil cloak acts as the balloon, the water inside boils and turns into vapor. Eventually, this pocket of steam will burst through the oil, and much like letting go of the balloon, this propels the drop. The second thing that confused them was that the drops went much faster than those levitating Leidenfrost water drops. 10 to 100 times faster, in fact. That was odd because the drop was still in contact with the oily surface. You would expect that contact to slow it down compared to the levitating drop.
So we were pretty stumped because the velocity of the droplet actually seemed like it was moving on an infinite pool.
That's Leon, who ran the experiments. He means that when he did the back calculations, based on the speed he saw the water drop was moving, the only way to make the calculation work out would be for the drop to be on an infinitely deep pool of oil. But in reality, the oil was only 10 microns thick. From a physics perspective, the amount of friction the oil surface should have is based on its depth. Think of it like pouring honey out of a bottle. The thin film is like the small opening in the cap. The honey moves very slowly. If you remove the cap entirely, the honey has less friction, and so it pours more quickly. If you do the calculation for oil 10 microns thick, the drop should move way slower.
I mean, that was one of the moments where I was like, no way, like this is crazy.
But what was even more surprising was the explanation. And that came when they looked at the super slow motion videos.
And we actually saw the surface of the droplet moving at this frequency that suggested that it's vibrating due to like boiling events like bubbling.
So as the water inside the drop boils, bubbles will form. The bubbles are trapped inside that oil film, and that causes the drop to go from perfectly circular to changing rapidly between asymmetric shapes. It looks like a sort of chaotic vibrating, and it means that the bottom of the drop is changing between different wavy shapes and no longer fully in contact with the oil the way it would be if it stayed as a perfectly circular drop. So the friction is much lower, and the drop can go really fast.
These are things that you see in very complex physical systems. So we are like quite, both first quite stumped in the beginning to then later on delighted by figuring this out.
But they don't have it all figured out yet. There's one question in particular that they want to look at next.
Why does the vapor eject from one side, right? Or how does it choose that? That's still a mystery for us, and we are figuring that out, because once we know that, we can then direct the motion of the drops to the way we want them.
If they can harness this power, these forces could be used in a lot of different situations. From handling tiny amounts of liquid for biotech applications, to cleaning films that build up in water treatment, to moving liquids in microgravity on other planets, or even carrying molecules to make tiny robotic delivery systems. And it all started as a flash of insight in the frying pan. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Sarah Vitak.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Colorectal cancer is the number 2 cancer killer of men and women in the United States, but it is preventable. Early on, colorectal cancer typically has no symptoms. It starts with a precancerous polyp or abnormal growth in the colon, which can be removed without surgery. Several tests are available to find these polyps, so they can be removed before they turn into cancer. Screening also finds colorectal cancer early when treatment works best. Recommended screening for adults at average risk begins at age 50 and continues until age 75. Learn about screening test options and find out which tests are covered by insurance. Talk to your healthcare provider about when you should be screened and discuss the best tests for you. For more information about colorectal cancer prevention, please visit cdc.gov/vital signs.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
The events of January 6th were part of an attempted coup.
Listen up. This matters. I'm Louis Black, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute with ACLU attorney Bill Newman.
As described in detail in a new book by Washington Post journalists Bob Woodward and Robert Costa, titled Peril, Trump's lawyer, John Eastman, advised Trump that he could remain in power despite the election results and wrote the now famous or infamous memo that laid out for Trump how he could do that. Eastman argued that the vice president has enormous power on how, which, and when electoral votes will be counted, and thus, in effect, the power to decide the election. Eastman argued in part that Pence could delay the certification of the Electoral College votes until certain Trump loyalists and state legislatures could change those states' votes. That was part of the plan. Pence's loyalty to Trump has been on full display throughout the administration, but playing a critical part in a coup, Pence wouldn't do it. But some vice president might. And some state legislatures might well appoint electors who could thwart the will of that state's voters. And the Electoral Count Act of 1887, which governs procedures, has numerous ambiguities, which allows the possibility of political machinations to install the loser as the winner. What we have learned recently is that our democracy is more fragile, less certain than we have thought. As the title of the recent New York Times editorial put it, January 6th was worse than it looked.
The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the American Civil Liberties Union because freedom can't defend itself.
Most people believe the American economy is rigged by and for bankers, CEOs, and other super-rich elites because it is. With their hired armies of lawmakers, lobbyists, lawyers, and the like, they fix the economic rules so ever more of society's money and power flows uphill to them. Take corporate CEOs. While 2020 was somewhere between a downer and devastating for most people, the CEO class made out like bandits, with each of the 3 top-paid corporate honchos pocketing as much as $1 billion in personal pay. Are they geniuses or what? What? All 3 of their corporations ended 2020 with big financial losses and declining value. So how can such mediocrity produce such lavish rewards? Simple. Rig the pay machine. Today's corporate system of setting compensation for top executives is a flim-flam disguised as a model of management rectitude. On its face, it sounds good. Pay for performance, it's called, meaning the CEO does well if the company does well. But who defines doing well? The scam at most major corporations is that the standard of corporate performance that the chief must meet to qualify for a huge payday is set by each corporation's board of directors. Guess who they are? Commonly, board members are the CEO's hand-picked brothers-in-law, golfing buddies, and corporate cronies. So they set the bar for winning multi-million-dollar executive paychecks so low that a sack of concrete could jump over it. This is Jim Hightower saying, well, can't corporate shareholders just vote no on any executive excess? Yes, but corporate rules decree that votes by shareholders are merely advisory, meaning top executives can ignore them, grab the money, and run. The system is fixed, and we need to break it. Howdy-ho, folks. Thanks for tuning in and sharing my weekly commentaries. Also, please join me for a live web show I host every other Tuesday, the Hightower Lowdown Happy Hour at the Chat and Chew Cafe. You can join the action live online as I chat with grassroots leaders and progressive sparklies from around the country. Go to hightowerlowdown.org/chatandchew to find out about upcoming guests and watch past episodes. That's hightowerlowdown.org/chatandchew.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1945. That was a day known in Hollywood as Black Friday. After World War II, the movie industry began to rake in profits. But they did not pass those profits along to their employees. 10,000 members of the Conference of Studio Unions were on strike. They were part of the Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners. They were also in a jurisdictional battle with the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, or IATSE, over who should represent stage decorators. The strike wore on for half a year. The studios had more than 100 films backlogged and were able to wait out the strikers. But as the strike continued and the studios remained silent, pressure mounted. Despite the tensions between the two unions, thousands of IATSE members refused to cross the picket lines. On Black Friday, the strikers decided to concentrate their efforts at the Warner Brothers Studios gate. 300 picketers gathered to hold the line. Scabs, hired by Warner Brothers, tried to drive through the workers' picket lines to the studio. Variety accounted what happened next, writing, quote, "Strikers deployed from their barricades, halted non-strikers, and rolled 3 automobiles on their sides. By noon, reinforcements arrived from both sides. Firemen were called in to turn their hoses on the striking workers. Warner Brothers security deployed tear gas. Common for the time, accusations were hurled that the Conference of Studio Union strikers were communists. As a result of the strike, the Conference of Studio Union's employees were assigned to other jobs in the studios. When they refused, they were locked out. The union never recovered. The violence at the Warner Brothers Studios gate also helped to fuel the passage of the Taft-Hartley Act through Congress, which eroded union protections. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon, on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 48 degrees Fahrenheit, and we've had a drastic temperature change for our daytime highs. We're only expecting to get to about 62 to 63 degrees today. Partly cloudy skies throughout the day. Winds will be out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. I should add that we got almost a quarter of an inch of rain starting in the late afternoon, early evening, and continuing through most of the night to our early morning hours. But it looks like it's starting to dry out a bit, and we should have some more rain coming this weekend. Copious amounts. Partly cloudy to mostly cloudy tonight. Lows about 41. Brr. Winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. And partly cloudy skies tomorrow with a high inching up only a couple of degrees to about 65. And winds will be out of the north-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Confirmed cases of coronavirus have been updated from the weekend totals, where we now stand at 220,043 confirmed infected. The state itself has seen a drop in infections, but the counties I live in, Josephine and Jackson, continue to increase because of the unvaccinated medical libertarians. Thanks so much for getting the rest of us sick. Can we sue you? I hope so. And deceased have been updated, and we have, oh my gosh, another 6 more confirmed dead, and we now stand at 288. Ragweed pollen remains moderate as the predominant pollen allergen out there in Rogue River proper, and the air quality index for the region is at 29 parts per million, and the daytime UV index remains moderate, though it has dropped down one more notch to 3. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 30.17 inches. Visibility is at 9 miles, and relative humidity is at 92%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 63 and sunny. Paris is 63 and partly cloudy. Rome is 70 degrees and mostly cloudy. Kyiv is 55 and fair. Kabul is 66 and clear. Hong Kong is 82 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 70 degrees and cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 60 degrees and fair. San Francisco, California is 55 degrees and mostly cloudy with a fog advisory on the bay and offshore, so take care. And New York is 65 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Staff at the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. The European Union unveiled a new strategy to combat growing antisemitism in Europe, with plans to better tackle hate speech, raise awareness about Jewish life, protect places of worship, and ensure that the Holocaust is not forgotten. According to Europe's Fundamental Rights Agency, 9 out of 10 Jews consider that anti-Semitism has increased in their country and is a serious problem. More than 1 in 3 people have considered emigrating to escape the abuse. But where would you go? The EU's executive branch, the European Commission, said it was presenting what amounts to the first strategy of its kind, given the persistence and significant increase of anti-Semitic incidents around the 27-country bloc. Under the plan, which will be rolled out over this decade, the Commission will use EU funds to support member countries as they develop their own national strategies and complement their actions. Funding will be provided to better protect public spaces and places of worship, to help Jewish people feel safer, with 24 million euros, which is about 28 million US, available already next year. Other steps will be taken to safeguard Jewish heritage and raise awareness about Jewish culture, life, and traditions. 1 in 20 Europeans has never heard of the Holocaust, so the Commission also wants to try to keep memory of the genocide alive by creating a network of sites where the Holocaust happened in cooperation with local communities. Another focus of the plan is to ensure the EU aid and development funds that go abroad cannot be used for activities that might incite hatred and violence against the Jewish people.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Stelios Missinus and Alkis Kostadana Tindis of Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. There's a new addition to Greece's postal service, a fleet of yellow robots sorting through the mail. 55 small, four-wheeled autonomous mobile robots, or AMRs, powered by AI, glide around Hellenic Post Sorting Center in Athens, speeding up an often arduous process. They can scan the postal code, weigh the package, and, directed by sensors, empty it into a corresponding mail sack set up around the platform. The robots are part of the state-owned company's digital restructuring program, which aims to tackle growing numbers of parcels from online shopping during the coronavirus pandemic. Wow, we're trying to slow down the mail here. They're speeding it up over there. Until recently, sorting has been carried out by manual labor, with a high demand in time, often with errors occurring, causing delivery delays for our customers and increased costs for the company, Hellenic Post Chief Executive George Kostanopoulos told Reuters. Up to 80% of parcel sorting has been handed over to the robots, and Kostanopoulos said the process was up to 3 times faster, ensuring next-day delivery. We're increasing delivery times to 5 to 7 days. The robots can handle as many as 168,000 parcels, weighing up to 15 kilograms a day, and only need to be recharged every 4 hours for 5 minutes. The purpose is not to replace human workers with robots, but rather to augment human workforces and make them more efficient, Konstantopoulos said. Let's speed up our delivery times, not slow them down. Let's go with the Greek method. Indeed. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.